Are miracles merely events that science has yet to explain? And what if the prodigies described in the Bible are manifestations of natural laws that we are only just beginning to understand? Imagine a God so grand that he created not only the universe but also the rules that govern it, and that, when he wishes, he uses these same laws to perform the extraordinary. In this study, we will explore how science and faith may not be opposites, but complementary, revealing that even the supernatural may bear the fingerprints of the Creator. Before there was time, matter, or space, there was God. In his infinite wisdom, he not only created all things but also established a precise, structured, and unchangeable order, what we today call the laws of nature. From the movement of the planets to microscopic chemical reactions, everything bears the mark of the Creator. The creation narrative in Genesis is not only poetic, it is profoundly revealing. "Let there be light," said God, and the light began to obey laws that we now define in physical formulas. The idea that the universe was created with purpose, precision, and predictability reveals a science that existed in divine plans long before being described by man. Imagine God as the greatest of all engineers, designing the workings of the universe with details incomprehensible to the human mind. Every element of creation, the fundamental forces, the water and carbon cycles, the symmetry of life, everything operates under constant principles. Gravity, entropy, photosynthesis, the genetic code, all these concepts we study in school are, in fact, manifestations of God's creative power. They are his invisible tools, sustaining the world in perfect harmony. It is no coincidence that many scientists throughout history, even with technical advancements and complex discoveries, ended their lives more faithful than when they began their research. The Bible does not separate science from faith, it shows that one depends on the other. When God organizes creation into days, establishes cycles, separates waters and lands, creates light and darkness, he is revealing the first signs of natural laws. These laws, although now described by equations, were born from the voice of God. Science is the language that man uses to try to understand what God has already ordered. Each scientific discovery, no matter how surprising, is not a threat to faith, but a confirmation that there is logic and intelligence behind everything. After all, if the universe were the result of chance, chaos would prevail, not the order we observe. By understanding science as part of God's plan, we are led to a new type of reverence. There is no conflict between believing in God and studying nature. On the contrary, studying nature is, in a way, studying the ways of the Creator. Modern physics, for example, reveals that everything in the universe is connected. This echoes what the Bible already teaches, that everything created is under divine sovereignty. And when we look at the starry sky or the complexities of DNA, we do not find randomness, but a signature. A signature that says, "I am the Alpha and the Omega." In the end, science brings us closer to the wonder of creation. Instead of diminishing God, it exalts him. Scientific inquiry, when done with humility, is a form of worship, a way to marvel at the perfection of the Creator's works. Thus, understanding that the laws of physics were written by God himself is the first step toward realizing that miracles are not violations of these laws, but actions by one who completely masters them. And it is in this understanding that the path to the supernatural begins, not with the abandonment of reason, but with the realization that reason, by itself, already points to the divine. Throughout the scriptures, we find events that defy any human logic: waters parting, the dead rising, diseases healed with a simple word. These miracles, as wondrous as they are mysterious, have always been understood as direct manifestations of divine power. However, what if some of them are also hidden expressions of natural laws that have yet to be fully understood by man? Not to diminish them, but to reveal that God, in his majesty, uses even the very structure of the universe, which he himself created, to operate the extraordinary. Take, for example, the episode where Moses parts the Red Sea. Researchers suggest that strong, continuous winds could, theoretically, temporarily displace large masses of water. Is this plausible? Perhaps. But could it be a coincidence that this phenomenon occurred precisely when Moses stretched out his staff, in front of thousands of fleeing Israelites, and that the waters returned just as the Egyptians tried to cross. Here, science may propose the how, but the why remains in the exclusive domain of the heavens. God could indeed have suspended the laws of nature, but he also could have used them precisely, at the exact moment, like a conductor conducting an invisible symphony. Another emblematic example is the healing of sick people. In times when medicine was rudimentary, Christ would touch a leper, and they would be healed. Today, we know that emotions, faith, and psychological states can significantly influence the immune system. Modern science studies the so-called placebo effect and the impacts of faith on patient recovery. But even if there is a biochemical explanation involved, it does not negate the fact that, in that moment, Jesus was the channel through which the miracle was activated. The healing came from God, even though it passed through the human body. The multiplication of loaves and fishes also intrigues scholars. Some try to explain how, in the face of collective faith in Jesus' leadership, many of those present may have been inspired to share what they had hidden. Others believe in a literal manifestation of instant multiplication. In either case, there was a miracle, whether in the hearts of the people or in the substance of the food. And, once again, we see God acting through the possibilities of creation, amplifying the natural with the touch of the supernatural. These events are not less divine because they are, in part, understandable. On the contrary, if God created the laws of nature, would it not be logical that he knows how to manipulate them with perfection? The Bible does not say that he violated the rules, only that he made the impossible happen. And what if the impossible is actually just beyond the current reach of human science? Science advances, yes, but God is always ahead. He does not need to contradict his creation to perform miracles. He simply guides it with authority and sovereignty. Therefore, the miracle is not only in the event itself but in its purpose, its timing, and its precision. What seems inexplicable to man is, for God, simply the refined use of what he himself created. When we read the biblical accounts, we are not only confronted with marvelous phenomena, we are confronted with the perfect harmony between faith and the laws that sustain the universe. And it is in this harmony that God continues to act, not bound by the limits of our understanding, but always operating through a universe that obeys his voice. Since the earliest days of humanity, people have looked to the sky in search of answers. The movement of the stars, the tides, the lightning, everything seemed mysterious, almost magical. But as the centuries progressed, it became clear that behind every phenomenon was an order, a pattern, a regularity. These observations gave birth to science. However, what few realize is that, by uncovering natural laws, scientists are merely revealing what was already established by God since creation. Science, far from contradicting faith, is a window to understanding divine power. Each physical law is like a score written by God, governing the rhythms of the universe. Gravity keeps the planets in orbit, photosynthesis sustains plant life, the genetic code defines every cell of our body. All of this follows impressively precise mathematical and structural principles. These laws did not come about by chance, they were determined by a creator who loves order, symmetry, and beauty. Isaiah 45:18 declares that God did not create it to be a waste, but to be inhabited. And that is exactly what we see, a purposeful universe, not a random collision of particles without direction. What is remarkable is that, the deeper science goes, the more it reveals this order. When Albert Einstein developed the theory of relativity, he not only unlocked the secrets of time and space, he also declared that the universe was comprehensible, which, for him, was a miracle. For many believing scientists, natural laws are a form of general revelation from God. They show his consistency, his justice, after all, the laws apply to everyone, and his power. Nothing escapes God's control, not even what we consider immutable, like the speed of light or the second law of thermodynamics. Therefore, saying that a miracle can operate through natural laws is not an attempt to rationalize God, but to recognize that he is so sovereign that he does not need to break his own rules to act. He can use the wind to part seas, biochemistry to heal diseases, and even magnetism to explain extraordinary phenomena. The true miracle is in God using what He created to manifest His love, His justice, and His intervention. Like the potter shaping the clay, He knows every atom and every energy. And He can, with absolute authority, use them whenever He chooses. But here is a crucial point: even with all the science, we will never be able to measure or predict the moment when God decides to intervene. Science can explain the how, but never the why or the for whom. Natural laws are just the frame. The miracle is the art painted by a God who transcends the limits of human logic. In other words, the laws do not contain God, they merely reflect a part of His wisdom. He is the legislator, but also the Lord of time and history. His power is not confined to the laboratory, but is revealed in faith, prayer, and the unexpected. Thus, when we study natural laws with spiritual eyes, we see not just formulas but testimonies of the Creator. Science does not exclude the divine, it reveals it in minute details. And when a miracle happens, we do not need to choose between faith and reason. We can humbly and reverently recognize that God used the gears of the universe, created by Him, to accomplish something that goes beyond our understanding. And in this encounter between science and faith, there is no conflict, there is all. On the dark night over the Sea of Galilee, the disciples were rowing against the wind, tired and fearful. Suddenly, something made them shudder. A human figure was walking on the water toward the boat. This scene is one of the most well-known in the New Testament, Jesus walking on the sea. But what exactly happened there? Was it a suspension of natural laws, an illusion caused by atmospheric phenomena, or something even deeper, a divine revelation through the very mechanisms of the universe? This specific miracle invites us to reflect on the fine line between the inexplicable and the supernatural. Some scientists suggest that, in extremely rare circumstances, ice formations called ice feet can develop in the shallow waters of the Sea of Galilee during atypical winters. Others point to a phenomenon known as superrefraction, in which layers of air with different temperatures distort light and make distant objects appear to float or move over liquid surfaces. There are still those who believe that Jesus may have walked on invisible sandbanks due to the water level. These explanations do not deny the event, they attempt to understand how it could have occurred within known laws. But even if these hypotheses had some scientific basis, the true miracle does not disappear, it just takes on a different form. The power of God is not just in suspending physics, but in mastering the times, the conditions, the places. The precise orchestration of natural phenomena for a moment of profound spiritual impact is, in itself, a miracle of divine precision. It is not necessary for gravity to cease to exist. It is enough that the Creator, who understands every molecule of creation, used the elements in favor of a higher message: it is I. Do not be afraid. John 6 verse 20. Moreover, the spiritual impact on the disciples did not depend on the scientific explanation. Their fear was not calmed by logic but by the presence of Jesus. The true miracle was not only physical, it was existential. They experienced divine authority over chaos, the certainty that, even when everything seems to be sinking, there is a God who walks toward us. Science can theorize about the scenario, but it will never explain the comfort, peace, and spiritual transformation experienced by those men that night. The most important point is this: when we try to completely separate the natural from the divine, we risk limiting God to human categories. God can act outside of laws, but He can also act through them. The miracle of Jesus walking on the water is not just in challenging physics, it is in showing us that God Himself enters our despair, walks through the storm, and calls us to trust in Him. Science may look at the surface of the water. Faith sees who is walking on it. So, natural phenomenon or divine miracle? The answer may be both. Because God is so great that He does not need to choose between heaven and earth, between the physical and the spiritual. He rules over all. And, while we try to understand how He does it, we should never forget who is behind it all. The mystery remains, not because of a lack of answers, but because the presence of God transcends any explanation. Throughout the New Testament, the miracles of Jesus not only challenged human understanding but also revealed a God who acts within history, touching lives with precision and love. Jesus healed the blind, multiplied food, cast out demons, and even resurrected the dead. Each miracle was an act of compassion, but also a sign of something greater, the presence of God among men. And as modern science advances, an inevitable question arises: could some of these miracles have plausible scientific explanations, while never diminishing their divine nature? Let's consider, for example, the healing of people with leprosy, a disease often mentioned in the scriptures. Today, we know that leprosy is caused by a bacterium, with symptoms that vary and, in some cases, can spontaneously remit. Would there then be a medical explanation for these healings? Perhaps. But that does not eliminate the miracle, it only broadens how it may have happened. The true miracle lies in the precise moment, in the response to faith, in the physical and spiritual transformation brought about by the presence of Jesus. It was not just the healing of the body, but the restoration of dignity, of life in society, of the bond with God. Or think of the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. Some suggest that the miracle could have involved the spontaneous sharing of food that was hidden among the crowd. Even so, it would be impossible to deny the power of Jesus' presence in inspiring mass generosity, a kind of moral and collective miracle that also defies the laws of human selfishness. Science can investigate the natural processes of multiplication or the psychological effects of charismatic leadership, but it cannot quantify the power of an act that satisfies both body and soul. And what about the resurrection of Lazarus? Some scholars speculate whether he was truly dead or in a deep coma. Even with this hypothesis, returning to life after 4 days, with odors already present, remains an event that surpasses any medical explanation. Even though science explores the concept of apparent death, the time and conditions described make the episode extraordinary. By bringing Lazarus back, God was not just intervening in biology, he was asserting his authority over time, over destiny, and over the impossible. These examples show that faith and science do not have to live in conflict. Faith allows us to see the purpose, the invisible hand that moves the threads of reality. Science attempts to decipher how these threads intertwine. When we recognize that natural laws were established by God, we can also accept that he can use these same laws as instruments of his will. Jesus did not contradict creation by performing miracles, he completed it. Matter obeyed its creator, as it always has since Genesis. Thus, instead of trying to fit miracles into a laboratory or dismissing them as fables, we should make room for a broader view. God is the author of all logic and, therefore, is not limited by it. Science may suggest how a miracle occurred, faith reveals why it happened. This harmony between reason and spirituality does not weaken faith, it strengthens it. For the greatest miracle of all is not to challenge the laws of nature, but to see God in them, acting with precision and love in every detail of creation. Despite all the advancements of science, from the mapping of the human genome to the probes sent to the farthest reaches of the solar system, there remains an impassable gulf between human knowledge and eternal mysteries. Science is a powerful tool, it investigates, measures, calculates, deduces. But it operates within limits, limits of perception, of time, of language, and of logic. And God, the creator of all natural laws, is not bound by any of them. Science walks on the surface of the physical world, God dwells in eternity and spirit. And that is why, no matter how much science brings us closer, it will never be enough to explain God. Many have tried to find in formulas and phenomena the origin of the universe, the Big Bang, dark matter, the cosmological constants. But even among the brightest physicists, there is a silent consensus, there is a moment before the beginning of everything that remains inaccessible. Science can show us how stars formed, but not why. It can explain the composition of DNA, but not the purpose of life. It can predict eclipses millennia in advance, but not the direction of the human soul. God reveals himself in the details of creation, but escapes the hands that try to contain him in equations. This does not mean that science is opposed to faith, on the contrary. The very fathers of modern science, such as Isaac Newton, Galileo Galilei, and Johannes Kepler, saw their discoveries as ways to admire the divine mind. They studied the world not to prove God, but to worship Him more deeply. However, over the centuries, many came to confuse knowledge with power, and science began to be seen, mistakenly, as a substitute for faith. But understanding the mechanisms of a clock never eliminates the need for a watchmaker. The universe still calls for an author. When we look at the miracles of Jesus, the healings, transformations, and inexplicable signs, we may seek physical explanations, and perhaps find some clues. But there will always be a point where logic ends and faith begins. Because the true miracle is not something that contradicts the laws of nature, but something that reveals the God who wrote those laws. It is at this boundary between the visible and the invisible that faith blossoms. Not as an antidote to ignorance, but as a bridge to the sacred. The greatest proof of this lies in human experience. No telescope can measure hope. No laboratory can capture forgiveness. No theory can explain unconditional love. And, no matter how much we try to understand the world, there is a dimension of God that can only be touched in silence, in prayer, in surrender. Science can tell us what we are. But only God can reveal to us who we are. Therefore, accepting the limits of science is not denying it, it is placing it in its rightful place. A divine gift to understand creation, but not the creator. A detailed map of the work, but not of the artist. And by recognizing this, we do not diminish science, we magnify faith. For science can lead us to the threshold of mystery. But only faith has the courage to cross it. And it is in this meeting between reason and reverence that we realize, God is not against science. He is far beyond it. No matter how much we advance in technology, physics, or biology, there will always be a frontier that science cannot cross, that of the divine. The attempt to explain miracles through reason does not weaken faith, it amplifies it, revealing that even natural laws can be instruments in the hands of the Creator. However, there is something that remains unchanging, the certainty that God works beyond what we can measure, predict, or comprehend. Science can point the way, but only faith allows us to see the invisible. And so, between hypotheses and mysteries, we continue with the question that still echoes, how far does science go, and where does the miracle begin?